This talk is about broadly about a major genre of viral or popular online media that I call the uplifting anecdote, and something about the prehistory of that genre as well. But I'd like to begin by saying just a brief word about the larger project that this case study is from, because I think it will help you sort of understand why I'm coming at the material from the angle that I am. I'm working on a book project. The tentative title is Content Culture, Genres of Virality in the 21st Century. This is a book project about viral or highly engaged content on major platforms throughout the past 2 decades or so. There's two things about the approach that are particular. The first is that it's holistic. I'm working across major platforms from Facebook to TikTok, and I'm looking at content or highly popular online content from 2010 to the present. So the premise there is partly historical. The idea is we've had this new popular media that we only call content online now with us for almost 2 decades. So it is a good moment to sort of take stock and think, what have been through lines, what have been expressive patterns across this media. And second, my approach is aesthetic. So much like Julia, I teach in an English department. My background, my PhD was in literature and aesthetic studies. So I'm interested in this content as sort of artistic, aesthetic, or expressive material, even when it's not necessarily what we would call art. And in a historical context, what are its styles of storytelling, its formal features, and so on. I also work in a field called digital humanities, which use sort of computational and data-driven methods to address these sorts of aesthetic and historical questions, which is to say my approach is sort of somewhere between the humanistic and the social scientific, and somewhere between the quantitative and the qualitative. So hopefully that can help frame the approach that is coming. So the major questions I ask are, what have been the sort of major genres of viral content throughout this period, by which I mean genres that have, spanned platforms, been popular on Facebook and TikTok, and that have had a sort of persistent popularity throughout the time period from 2010 to the present. And so I restrict this largely to a United States and English language context, but obviously these questions could be asked from many different sort of linguistic and roughly national perspectives on the material. And the second question I ask is, how do these major genres then compare with their sort of close historical cousins, whether it's the sort of similar forms we've seen in tabloids or on television or in 19th century newspapers. For this talk in particular, too, and towards the theme of this conference, I'm interested in how some of these genres have negotiated sort of intercultural or interethnic or, transnational exchange. So today I'll talk about a genre that I call the uplifting anecdote. So in the first part of the talk, I just want to establish some of this genre's prominence, especially on Facebook, and again in an English language and US context since 2010. And in the second part, I just want to touch a little bit on its prehistory and how the contemporary genre compares with some of these precursors. Um, this is part one. So I define this genre that I call the uplifting anecdote as a sort of a short tale or story. It is presented as real or true, whether or not the events in fact are real. And it's about an everyday act of heroism or sort of human goodness, but I also say or animal goodness because many of these actually feature animals as the sort of characters, dogs, cats, and so on. So the shorthand for this genre that's used sometimes in platform speak is it, restores your faith in humanity, or animality. So examples would be, cats help pregnant goat through birth. A veteran weeps over new home built by teens. Artists installed seesaws at the border so kids in the U.S. and Mexico can play together. So this is a multimodal genre. We see it in video forms, we see it in textual journalistic forms. It comes in those different mediations. It's a cross-platform genre. It has popularity on Facebook, it has popularity on TikTok, on Instagram. It's a transnational and linguistic genre. I've certainly seen examples of it across the different languages that I can parse and from different national contexts. But in this talk, I'm gonna focus particularly on its Facebook forms, and again in this sort of U.S. and English context. So it's also very similar to a lot of types of genres that have gotten attention in internet studies. It's similar to cute content. It's similar to animal content. It's similar to what's sometimes called eudaimonic or feel-good content, especially in advertising, but it's not precisely any of those things. It is its own particular form of storytelling that I want to kind of shine a light on for a moment. Um, so in terms of establishing the genre's prominence, I don't have time to sort of share all of the work with the data here that I'm using for the project, though I'm happy if anyone would like to discuss more details to provide, more of the nitty-gritty. But to go through it somewhat quickly, I'm working with data from Facebook. That is provided from a aggregator called NewsWhip through their Data for Democracy program, which is a data sharing program with academics. It's basically access to Facebook API, which has been available only on and off throughout the last 10 years, which is why I pursued this alternative route rather than trying to get data through the company. So I've got three different data sets I'm working with from Facebook. Two of them are from after 2018, and one of them goes back from 2015 to 2017. Speaking of topics of digital preservation, it is very hard to find data sets from before that time, so I have to fill in a more piecemeal fashion there. And the first two data sets basically involve most engaged links and most engaged posts on the platform in US and English language context. And the final data set, the earlier time period, is most shared link posts on the platform. So from these data sets, I've taken smaller samples of various kinds for sort of, human annotation and labeling. Six in total that I'm working with right now, two from each set with details provided on the slide, either stratified by year or by the publication or the page that posted the data of about, 600 for the most part, posts or links. And then I've engaged with a research assistant or two research assistants in a process of just annotating this data by genre. And the annotation process has been exploratory in the sense that the aim is to sort of try to just cover all of the genres of posts, to sort of sort the posts and links each into some generic bucket of some kind. And some of the genres are more sort of simple and thematic in nature, like it's about sports, it's about news. But some of them are also more aesthetic and expressive and try to capture some of those qualities of storytelling that, as someone who has studied the arts and culture in that way, interest me more. So we give up to sort of two genre labels to a post, to each post or link, though it can just be one. And we sort of reconcile any disagreements in the labeling through a process of ex post facto discussion and adjudication. So to just quickly look at the results for this genre that I've called the uplifting anecdote, between four of the six sets that we've labeled so far, its frequency was anywhere from about, 5% to, in one of the sets, up to, 17%. And that even on the lower end, the sort of 5%, it might seem like a small number, but if you think about the fact that this is, all of the sort of, or a large portion that I could get through this data set of the most shared content on the platform in all of its variety, for sort of one out of every 20 posts to belong to this genre, at least to me, feels fairly substantial. Um, so in terms of this type of media that is kind of, we might call this genre a form of sort of like fluff. It seems like a kind of trivial, entertainment-based genre. It's not sort of hard news. It's not overtly political. But of course, there's been a lot of work in affect theory on this sort of media that talks about, the kinds of feelings that this seemingly sort of trivial content can evoke, and even how those feelings can become political. A lot of this work has focused on community and the sort of formation of communal feelings through this type of content. But though I'm interested in the sort of affects of this content and its links to communal feeling, I also want to ask, what are the different particular forms of this content and the particular feelings or affects that those forms might enable or inspire. An uplifting anecdote about veterans is going to provoke a potential different set of responses than one about, kittens. And so, how can we adjudicate between these formal differences in a more detailed way? And of course, beyond feelings of community and connection, what other sorts of, sensations did this type of media afford when we just sort of privately consume them, in a less connective sort of mode? To that end, I want to talk quickly about some of the different forms of this uplifting anecdote and how they compare with sort of pre-digital versions of the genre. So there, even just in a sort of US based and English language context, and even just taking, the post 1800 period, there are many different types of precursors for this sort of heartwarming or sentimental media, and I've listed a number of them on this slide. Though this list could just extend, indefinitely. Um, but I want to talk about one particular comparison between sort of one type of contemporary uplifting anecdote that I see quite a bit, and some versions of sort of 19th century American sentimental media, and much of which was in newspapers, and a lot of which focused on, or some of which focused on questions of sort of abolitionism. So the uplifting anecdote comes in many forms. This is just a list of, of the versions of the genre I've collected so far, of the kind of top words appearing in the headlines as sort of lemmatized. So as you can see from the number one word being dog, a lot of these are about pets and animal rescues. As you can see from the word, veteran, many of these are focused on nationalism and patriotism and militarism. But there is also a large subset of the genre that is focused on sort of sympathetic exchange or understanding between different ethnic identities, or other types of identity categories or groups. And so I've given examples here on this slide. So I'll just read the last one. A 24-year-old model who was told to bleach her skin, now worth $4 million for her beautiful dark skin tone. So this is a sort of meant to be, or intended at least, overtly in its framing, to be a sort of heartwarming story about racial acceptance in the context of aesthetics or beauty categories in the modeling industry. Now, of course, we might offer many different readings of this type of story, but that feels like at least a primary and overt intention of this media. And so, a prominent precursor that I'm thinking about in terms of this media is many 19th century sentimental forms in the United States, and one of the the closest precursor probably I've encountered for this thing I'm calling the uplifting anecdote is a 19th century newspaper genre that one of my wonderful colleagues, his name is Ryan Cordell, and collaborators have conducted what's called the Viral Text Project, which is about small bits of text that circulated through 19th century newspapers that really feel very much like contemporary sort of news feed content, though of course there are many important differences, both thematically and in terms of media and culturally and so on. But these sort of short form viral vignettes, as he calls them, were sort of heartwarming, brief stories. And then, of course, there were sort of popularly, often serialized, sentimental novels. And of course, the famous example in terms of a sort of abolitionist cause or in terms of trying to inspire sympathy across racial categories is Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin. So there are many comparisons that could be drawn between the sort of uplifting anecdotes I'm talking about online and these, viral vignettes of the 19th century, as well as these sort of sentimental novelistic texts. But I just want to highlight one because I have limited time, which is that, one thing I've noted in analyzing these sort of uplifting anecdotes of identity is that they are heavily focused on acts of sort of aesthetic creation, beauty, or making of a certain type. That is to say that the vision of sort of goodness or understanding that they discuss is often very bound up with kind of acts of creativity. So the example here involves, a photo shoot that sort of framed a particular woman in a different light. And then many of the examples that I put on the screen before, if you sort of look closely at them, you could sort of identify some involvement of aesthetics or art or creativity or making in these examples. So, one reason for that might be the way the platforms work. A lot of these and the content farms that create this content, a lot of them rely on kind of free labor of amateur creatives. So you could say that's a kind of, ideology of the production. And also a lot of these forms have succeeded through a circulation via sharing, which is a kind of expressive act, a celebration of some sort of, you know, a person sharing this content might be sort of expressing a celebration of what's going on. So it perhaps makes sense that there's something about like expression thematically embedded in this content, though, more research would be required to work out that psychology of sharing. But I'll close by saying, I think there's sort of potentially two ways to think about that as a feature of these uplifting anecdotes that go along with a long tradition of thinking about sentimental media. The first is that, as per the opinion of James Baldwin that I've put on the screen, some people have thought of sentimental media as really complacent and a kind of excuse for do-gooder types to sort of pat themselves on the back for their fine feelings of sympathy and then sort of take no action. And so if we think about the really expressive quality of these uplifting anecdotes online, we might, levy that critique and say, well, this is an even more exaggerated version of that kind of complacency, or, slacktivism is the term for this sort of online phenomenon. But there's also another tradition that, and I've quoted Philip Fisher here, the critic, as an exponent of it, that thinks of sentiment as, very problematic in many of its formulations, but also as a genre that has sort of widened the scope of what sort of mainstream popular media can focus on in terms of types or areas of humanity. And so we might also say that by focusing on sort of expression and representation, these uplifting anecdotes are almost embracing that idea that sort of cultural representation matters, and has a sort of, and that the stakes of sort of representation are important. So I leave it to you to decide sort of, what you think about this genre's popularity, but I hope to have established that it has been popular and has some interesting connections to precursors. So thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.